Happy Friday, everybody. My name is Jonathan Cottrell, and this is episode number 3 of Developer Tea Friday Refills. I've been doing these Reddit streams recently. Hop onto Reddit Public Access Network. It's their new streaming service. And I try to answer questions. Many of them recently have been about GameStop stocks, so I have to kind of ignore those. But one that came today was about the problem of having a teacher that doesn't like you and specifically is overloading you and the other students with work. And this seems to be a problem that we face in school, and it is a problem because this is a really bad way to learn. Recent research shows that if you try to cram in a bunch of information, it's going to go out as quickly as it came in. Now, what's interesting is we don't need recent research to kind of gain this insight. In fact, way back in the 1st century AD, Seneca said this. He said, "Since the mind, when distracted, absorbs nothing deeply, but rejects everything which is, so to speak, crammed into it." Think about that for a second. The mind, when distracted, absorbs nothing deeply, but it rejects everything which is crammed into it. When we are distracted, we're not going to absorb anything. We don't need research to tell us this. We can experience this. Many of us already do experience this, and yet, for some reason, our intuition tells us that we can cram things. Or, a close analogy to this, not just cramming, but we can multitask. We can try to do more than one thing at once. So there's two things going on here. First is the speed at which we are trying to put information in our minds. And the second is the parallel nature of whatever we're trying to do, whatever we're trying to put in our minds as well. Now, to be very clear, when we say parallel, we're not talking about switching from one task to another, which has a different type of overhead. We're talking about actually trying to do two things at once, which is nearly impossible. Our brains are not good at this. We're very bad at trying to retain a lot of information all at once. So what is it exactly about this intuition? Where does it come from? Why do we believe this? And what do we do about it? Well, first, it should be noted that the vast amount of information that we have available to us now is new. We haven't had this much information in our world in any generation before this. Of course, we've always been kind of increasing information levels, but more recently, the increase has been exponential. And for this reason, we don't really have an evolved state for understanding this vast array of information. So instead, we're resorting to some heuristics that we have that may not necessarily represent what our brains are actually good at doing. If you imagine what we evolved to do, which is to make sense out of a limited amount of information, and compare that to what we're having to do now, which is try to filter out the information that doesn't matter, we still don't really know how to do that. And so filtering out information that doesn't matter tends to look less logical and more emotional. But getting back to the point of why are we believing that we can cram all of this information in, part of that is because we've never been faced with this much information before, and we evolved to be able to generally understand a very large relative share of the information. So in other words, our group of people, we all had about the same amount of information, and most of that information was the same information. We didn't have this highly heterogeneous mix of information that the internet has certainly provided to us. And so we don't really know how to control what information we should or shouldn't be taking in. And because there's a firehose of that information, perhaps, and this isn't necessarily proven, it's just the theory, we are trying to respond to the fire hose by cramming all of that information in as quickly as we can. But here's my advice for you today in this Friday refill. And as you go into your weekend, I want for you to, number one, accept that you will not be able to even come close. Not even a fraction of the available information will you be able to even lay eyes on, much less evaluate and absorb. And then secondly, to change your environment, change your habits, change your, physically, you could go into your phone and change the way that you receive information rather than that information being pushed at you and you having to face that information. Change that dynamic to where you are seeking out the information yourself. And what does this do? It means that you are selectively filtering what information comes to you. One way to do this, very practically speaking, is to turn off your notifications. Now, this achieves another goal that's related to that original Seneca quote. It helps us be less distracted. And when we're less distracted, we can focus on the things that we really care about. That filtering mechanism we're talking about, we can find that filter again. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Friday Refills. This is a part of Developer Tea. If you enjoyed this conversation, you would probably enjoy the rest of this podcast. You can subscribe in whatever podcasting app you're currently using. Thanks so much for listening. And until next time, enjoy your tea.